Hey, sports fans, Coach Nick here, and welcome to the B-Ball Breakdown live show coming at you on a Friday because we have an emergency pod we have to do to talk about breaking developments. And because of that, I'm not only joined, as always, by Andrew Combo-Sal to discuss this, but we also have Joe Mullinax, who is the co-host of Locked On Grizzlies and a contributor to Grizzlied, and is the guy who's going to be able to break this down for us better than we can. So let's just start with you, Joe, right away. Thanks for coming on the show. And Taylor Jenkins fired, 9 games left in the season. What do you make of this?
The timing is what's surprising. The fact that this is happening is not surprising. And first off, thanks to you guys for having me on. As I said in our show that just went live on our Locked On Grizzlies YouTube, Apple, all those places, the fact that this is happening now as opposed to 2 months from now or even a month from now potentially is what the surprise is. You look at the record of the Grizzlies, 44-29, tied with the Lakers, big showdown game Saturday night in Memphis. You're surprised in that way if you haven't been paying attention. But the Grizzlies are 8-11 since the trade deadline. The Grizzlies are 11-20 this season against teams with a record 500 or better. The Grizzlies defensively since January 1st are almost 20th in the league in defensive efficiency per cleaning the glass. And that is a space where Taylor Jenkins has been able to hang his hat even when the team was bad last year because of the Morant injury and suspension, all the absences that happened that went into last season's shortcomings that led to the Grizzlies being able to draft Zach 89th overall. All that, they still were 13th in the league in defense. They are going backwards. They were going backwards. If you've been following this team, the fact that it's happening is not the surprise. The fact that it's happening now with 9 games to go heading into the postseason is what is surprising. But clearly, Grizzlies GM Zach Kleiman felt that the time was now to make the change. Why wait until a first-round playoff exit to make it official?
I mean, that is fascinating. Let's go back a little bit because at the beginning of the year, they revamped the entire coaching staff pretty much, right? Brought in a whole bunch of new coaches. What do you think that said about them, moving from last season into the season? They were 30th in offensive rating last year, and I know that must have been a focus, but was that surprising? Did Taylor Jenkins, did he have dominion over who was hired to be on that coaching staff?
It's hard to really know for certain, and I do think in the days to come how this is handled, you'll notice that the interim coach, at least as of this recording, haven't had a chance to check social media. I think X went down for a while, at least it seemed. Taylor Jenkins, Memphis blowing up the internet. How about that? But I haven't gotten anything official in terms of who the interim coach is going to be. That was not necessarily a focus here. The focus was moving on from Jenkins. Offensively, you're exactly right. And the changes have been positive, right? The Grizzlies in the half court in particular are now more of a middle of the road offense. And in the past, they've been dead last in half court offense. So there's been growth in that space. But again, the defense has regressed. And to be honest with you, Ja Morant has regressed. He's missed a lot of games due to injury, but he's also not having the offensive impact, especially as a scorer, that he's had in the past. I don't think it's a coincidence that Ja is seeing a more down season in the same season where the coaching staff has implemented an offense that runs less pick and roll than any other team in the entire NBA. There's a correlation there. It's connected. I do believe that you have to understand, if you follow this team every day, Ja is a key cog in what makes this thing go. So while Santi Aldama having a career year is great, Jaren Jackson Jr. offensively having a career year is fantastic. Those are positive things. But if you're not getting the most out of Ja Morant in particular, you are not going to have the kind of season that this Grizzlies team has been on the record saying they want to have, and that is contending for a championship. So again, the timing is interesting, but at the same time, you're looking at this team that has underachieved since the calendar turned, and especially since the trade deadline. Why wait if you think that this could give a little bit of a shock to the system, like happened in Sacramento earlier in the year, and maybe get you over the hump, not to contend for a title this season. This roster has bigger issues than that, but to at least be more competitive in the here and now, because this is not a competitive basketball team against good basketball teams right now. 41 minutes against the Thunder last night excluded.
So when I have had the chance to watch this team play, I have noticed it's more Ja in the corner, not having the basketball as much. Have you seen that as well? And could that have anything to do with this firing at all?
Maybe. I do think that the interesting thing with Memphis is they play so much close to the vest, right? They're a tremendous local media. One of my partner on Locked On Grizzlies, DeMichael Cole, is the Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal there in the city. You know, the local media does a terrific job covering the team. The organization as a whole is pretty secretive, right? The fact this wasn't leaked, that you found out from the Grizzlies themselves. How often does that happen in the NBA today, where something this seismic comes directly from the franchise and everybody goes, "Oh,
I guess we could ask,
right?"
I guess we could ask Luka Doncic maybe, but yeah, besides that.
Sure. No, that's a great example, right? That's a great example. So I think that the reality of this situation is whatever was dictated to Jenkins going into the season, obviously change had to come. No coach makes those many changes to their assistant coaching staff because they want to, right? You develop relationships with these people. There's guys that have been on that staff since Jenkins got to Memphis. You overhaul it. You believe in this offensive system. And again, to the credit of the staff, it worked. And to credit Jenkins in particular, he is a phenomenal developmental coach. The Grizzlies, you could pretty easily argue, have overachieved over the last 6 years. The acceleration of their timeline, being a title contender 2 or 3 years ago, back when Ja and Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. were 23, 24 years old, they were the number 2 seed in the Western Conference. So he deserves credit for that. But there comes a time in every team's arc of competitiveness, every era, where you have to decide, is this going to be the guy that gets you over the hump? And I think after the size of this season, the sample size, and you see how Ja Morant has not been able to be his true self consistently. Desmond Bane is having a career worst season in turnover percentage. He's asking more and more players, or he was asking more and more players, to be facilitators, dribble penetration. It was an offensive scheme that really thrived at the Division III level. The Division III level doesn't have guys like Ja Morant. And I think that the ability to mesh the superstar caliber player of Ja with the offensive system, it just didn't click enough. And for context, Morant's missed a lot of time due to injury. It may not all be on Jenkins. I think he's a good coach, but there's a lot of factors that play into where we are right now.
Have you seen, like, I do remember in my hard drive in my brain that Jenkins, for instance, like, I don't think he fouls up by 3. That's one of those things that always has my my alarm bells go off a little bit as a throwback to an earlier age where you didn't do that. And, you know, a lot of times it just seems to be a little bit indicative of a coaching mind frame that might be a little bit in the past. Do you hear other whispers about his coaching in particular that, you know, that felt like that could be a problem they thought they couldn't overcome?
There have been segments of the fan base that have wanted Taylor Jenkins fired since the Minnesota Timberwolves series several years ago. Now, those folks were crazy then, but I do think there's always been concerns about rotational choices. He made a call to call a timeout against the Atlanta Hawks. John Hollinger tweeted about it earlier, or posted about it earlier today, you know, allowing for them to make a change in terms of their, you know, getting Trae Young off the court, going more defensive in a final set, and how that led to the Hawks getting a game-breaking win on a layup there at the end. There's been things like that. The inability to change scheme in game, because obviously we mentioned the offensive changes. Again, credit for that. But as good as the defense has been over the Taylor Jenkins era, there were way too many games, part of the Budenholzer coaching tree, where guys were open for 3 and there wouldn't be an adjustment. They just kept shooting threes, right? And they kept making threes. And it felt like there for a stretch, especially last season, but true this season too, where teams were setting the most threes in franchise history. It was coming against the Memphis Grizzlies. So there's been questions about rotations. For me, one of the biggest triggers for asking questions was the selection of Zach Edey. Zach Edey, 7'4", 290 pounds. I think Zach Edey is an NBA big. I've seen enough of him that I think he can play at this level. I'm not sure Taylor Jenkins thinks he can. He plays 17, 18, 20 minutes a game. Recently, he's been moved to a reserve role in favor of Santi Aldama and Jaren Jackson Jr. The Grizzlies struggle rebounding when Jaren is at the 5. That is established. That's not a surprise. I'm not an NBA head coach, but I've watched this team play for a long time. They're not a good rebounding team when Jaren's out there as the center. And yet, they've made that call. Why was Edey selected as someone who doesn't have an established three-point game, as someone who's not a traditional modern NBA center athletically? Why was he picked at 9th overall only to play 16, 17, 18 minutes a game, especially in the wake of Brandon Clark getting injured in recent games. There's been lots of disconnects like that have kind of perked my interest over the last several weeks and months.
Do you feel like Edey was the right choice, or do you feel that, it was a good choice, but he's just not getting the right opportunity? Which is it more of?
I wanted Donovan Clingan, and I think that kind of goes to a larger, and my co-host wanted Ware in Miami. DeMichael wanted Ware. So I think that it comes down to an understanding that while firing a head coach who's the winningest coach in franchise history, 9 games left into the regular season before the team makes the playoffs, Zach Kleiman is very comfortable in his position. That's a takeaway from me. I don't think the GM is on the hot seat in any way, shape, or form. You don't do this without the blessing of the owner. You don't do this without the blessing of your players.
Right.
But at the same time, the failure of this has to be worn by Kleiman. Marcus Smart being a member of the Memphis Grizzlies and not being what the Grizzlies needed, it was worth trying, but that was a failure that isn't the coach's fault. Making or not making trades to bring in more veteran players like Dorian Finney-Smith, we forget about that. Remember, Memphis was on the 5-yard line. They were close to bringing in DFS, and then the Lakers swooped in with a better deal at the last minute. Okay, now you're starting Jalen Wells, who's had a good rookie season, but emphasis on rookie. A young man who 2 years ago was playing at Sonoma State, who no longer has an athletic department at the Division II level. We're talking about guys that are being asked to do things that they shouldn't be asked to do if you're truly a championship contending team. So Edey is just another piece of that. If you're trying to run a scheme that is motion-based, why would you have a 7'4", 290-pound, very good screener who can rebound the ball offensively? You're putting him in the corner. You're having him set screens at the top of the key and then pop out to the arc, as opposed to being a roller in the dunker spot almost every time. There were questions schematically going along with the roster, but the roster's construction is flawed. And that might be another reason why they're accepting their fate now. If Taylor Jenkins was the head coach moving forward the rest of the season, the end result was still probably going to be, especially because Clark is out and his versatility, they're going to miss that tremendously against whoever they play. You're still probably getting eliminated in the first round. Now you're saying, let's see if something sparks. And if it does, maybe we have our guy on staff. If it doesn't, we'll go outside and we'll try to build something that represents our roster better.
I mean, it is fascinating that you could that last part you said would be considered with 9 games left and then heading into a playoff series. That the guy would have any ability to really do anything meaningful at this point. We saw Taylor Jenkins and John Morant. I believe this was recently the dancing on the sideline, right? That went a little viral. That indicates to me like they were probably on good terms. Was that safe to say?
Yeah, I don't think John Morant was involved in this. And I clarified that on social media as well. The idea that Morant as a superstar, you see that often, right? The coach killer. I don't think that's Ja. I mean, to be honest with you, in a Memphis perspective, David Fizdale probably would call Marc Gasol a coach killer, right? And he wouldn't be that far off, depending on whose version of the story you believe. I think that in this case, it has more to do with, have we gotten as much as we can get out of Taylor Jenkins as head coach of the Grizzlies, getting this team to a certain point? They were ascending for so long, right? Ascending and going up, up, up. It was ESPN Memphis Grizzlies Day a couple of years ago. And it looked like John Morant was the future of NBA basketball or American basketball at large. And there was so much that was happening. And then obviously what happened with Ja happened, but it's been too stagnant, right? And again, in the last few months, it's been regressing. It hasn't been progressing. So for me, that is where it kind of doomed Jenkins. It had nothing to do with the players wanting him out. He had really good relationships with those guys, at least to my eye and to what I know. I think it has more to do with the organization realizing this has gone as far as it can with this guy. Why have a sitting duck or a lame duck session here? See if something sparks like it did with Sacramento. If it doesn't, it ends probably the way it was going to end anyway. And you go into a search moving on from there.
Okay. It's still very strange, though, only because the Sacramento example was way earlier in the season.
Sure.
And you have to imagine they did not decide to do this today. They didn't decide to do this yesterday, right? This must have been talks that had gone on for, I would say, weeks at this point, right? Before they make a decision,
sure.
Right?
But look at how,
or if it's something we don't know about, right? That happened yesterday or the day before.
I think if you, watching the Grizzlies play the Thunder last night, the Grizzlies competed with Oklahoma City for 41 minutes, and then the wheels completely fell off. Well, what changed? Nothing changed. It was the same players. There was no major injury that deflated the Grizzlies. Oklahoma City was able to make adjustments in game that the Memphis Grizzlies couldn't react to. And we have seen that consistently throughout this entire season, and not even necessarily this entire season, but the entire Jenkins tenure. The inability to adjust on the fly is okay when you're overachieving, right? But the Grizzlies are no longer overachieving. So as the goalposts move, as you expect more from what is going on the court, you have to be held accountable for that. It's a lot easier to fire a head coach than it is to make a trade. And again, Zach Kleiman wears some blame in this. The fact that his moves have made the team younger didn't help Jenkins as those goalposts got moved in terms of expectations. But I do think there is, if you haven't been following this team the last 3 months, you're probably stunned that a 44-29 head coach just got canned. The Grizzlies are 11-20 against teams with a 500 or better record. Guess who has a better than 500 record? Whoever they play in the playoffs in 3 weeks, right? That team is going to have a better than 500 record. Right. So this is a team that has probably reached its zenith with Taylor Jenkins as the head coach, and they made the call to do it now. Again, the timing is what is surprising. If this had happened 6 weeks from now, I wouldn't be batting an eye. But the fact that it's here and now, I don't think anything tremendously bad happened. I think that the straw that broke the camel's back was just another example to add. You were in the fight against the Thunder, and then they made an adjustment with their scheme that you weren't able to counter. And because of that, it just maybe dawned on him that it was time to make a change ahead of an extremely important game for the Grizzlies against the Lakers.
Yeah, I'm excited to dig into the game last night to see exactly what happened and how that switched, because as I'm looking at the stats, one thing I'm sure they were looking at was that the Grizzlies give up the most wide open threes in the league, which when you mentioned Budenholzer and you mentioned defensive principles that he adjusts, which is from Popovich's tree, that was always tends to be the one thing where they would overhelp into the lane because they don't want anyone shooting shots near the basket, which I understand, but then the risk of in the modern game getting destroyed from the outside.
And offensively, the turnovers, right? Lost possessions. You'll see that the Grizzlies are one of the worst teams, not just in terms of turnovers, but in terms of points scored off of those turnovers. The Oklahoma City Thunder outscored Memphis by 20 in that particular category in the game last night. Memphis lost by what, 21? It's never as simple as one number, but you go and you look through all the different games that they've played, all the different games they've lost. I'd be willing to bet in at least half of those games they get abused in points lost after turnovers, and that's something that hasn't been getting better. Again, the team was getting better. They've reached the plateau, and they're starting to regress, and especially defensively. The thing that he was able to hang his hat on was defense, and that's no longer the case.
Let's go to we have a super chat to answer with one of our best friends of the pod or the breakdown, Braun. Thank you so much, Braun. Great to see you. And they ask, the half-court offense has always been a big weakness for them. Was this a system or a roster issue, and did the new offense improve that this year? What do you think, Joe?
It definitely improved. The numbers back that up. They were middle of the pack, roughly, in terms of half-court offense. They were dead last the prior season per cleaning the glass. So I think there's improvement there. But again, the goal of improvement should be to improve you for the postseason. And whenever this team played against better teams, the offense struggled mightily, right? That is something that is important to point out. The turnovers would go up. They would not be able to complete the passes that they were making against bad teams. It was a scheme and is a scheme. I'm guessing they can't change it too much in 24 hours. It's a scheme that is effective in terms of maximizing role players and guys like that. And that was successful in that way. But when it comes to the playoffs, why are people fearful of the Golden State Warriors, who have a worse record than the Memphis Grizzlies? Because they have Steph Curry and they have Jimmy Butler now. Why do teams fear the Los Angeles Lakers, even though they have the exact same record as the Memphis Grizzlies? Because of Luka Doncic and LeBron James. The Memphis Grizzlies, the collective, is not going to get it done in a 7-game series the way that the NBA is built. You have to have your stars built around, and this scheme does not do that effectively enough.
That's a great answer. Well, we have one other super chat here from the Drew Show, another friend of the breakdown. Thanks so much, Drew. Really appreciate it. He says, if San Antonio doesn't sign Taylor Jenkins tomorrow, then the Coach Pop incident this year is greater than we fear in San Antonio. Well, I think he's meaning the stroke. Is that the incident he's talking about? Because that's
Right.
I would, yes, I don't think Papa's coming back from that. I don't think he should. I think he's had a long career and probably, needs to recover and should have,
Sure.
Doesn't need to have that extra level of pressure on anyone after going through that. But let me ask you this. Do you feel like Taylor Jenkins should be, everyone, it seems like the reaction was, oh, he'll get hired in the second, another job. But the thing with the Spurs is that they're in a very similar position as the Grizzlies were a couple of years ago. So now I'm wondering if, do they realize that, look at that and realize that they're going to hit the same dead end in a couple of years, or is this going to be a thing where Jenkins is going to learn from it?
A good example of this is JB Bickerstaff. People forget that JB Bickerstaff was the head coach of the Memphis Grizzlies, and then he got let go by the Memphis Grizzlies. He went to Cleveland and grew as a coach. The roster grew under Bickerstaff, and then Cleveland made the choice that they needed to move on from Bickerstaff, even though they were having success. Bickerstaff goes to Detroit, and how are the Detroit Pistons doing? Coaches grow and
Very
get
good.
better.
Coach Nick, they're doing very good, and Cade Cunningham is a superstar.
You had to ask that.
But that's the point I'm trying to make. A very similar progression could happen here. Taylor Jenkins will grow and learn and develop as a coach. Maybe San Antonio, and that would be a kick in the pants of the Grizzlies as the divisional rival, but maybe San Antonio would be a place where he takes that next step as a coach. Taylor Jenkins is going to get another job. If I was the Washington Wizards, I would call him immediately. Mm-hmm. I don't know if they have or haven't. But there's certain teams that are in a spot where they are trying to get younger and they're trying to develop talent. Taylor Jenkins is very, very good at that. And as he grows as a coach, he's still a pretty young head coach. As he grows as a head coach, maybe he gets better with his roster. The Grizzlies just made the choice that it's time to contend and win now. And they decided, because of that regression over the last few months, Jenkins isn't the guy to get them to that space.
Fascinating stuff. Go ahead, Combo.
From 1 to 10, how ridiculous would it be to trade Ja Morant?
If Zach Kleiman, the Grizzlies GM, is to be believed, -5. It's not going to happen. I want to stress.
Have you heard those rumors though? Have you heard any of those rumors?
Just nationally, nothing from nothing locally. Gotcha. And again, you see Zach Kleiman at the draft. You see Zach Kleiman at the end of the trade deadline, at the start of the season, at the end of the season. You see him literally 4 times all year. The owner of the Memphis Grizzlies could be a ghost for all I know. In terms of, I've seen him before, but it's not like Mark Cuban. It's not like other owners that are very present and active. The reality of the Grizzlies is they play things close to the vest. They are not actively going out and doing these things and shopping around. When a rumor gets leaked, it's rarely, if ever, from the organization itself. So I do believe that when he came out and actively said, this is not happening. And again, the fact that he fired a 44-29 coach, the ownership is on his side. So you have to connect those dots. If anything, I think this makes it more likely that the Grizzlies go out and hire a coach. They'll have an interim coach in the here and now. And again, they might have announced it and I'm just missing it. That they might have an interim coach. They have to have an interim coach. But I wouldn't be surprised if they went outside of the organization and they brought in somebody that was a veteran head coach that had won before and said it's time to win. Right? Mm-hmm. We'll see if they are interested in coming to Memphis. We'll see if they're, there's obviously context and levels to that. But I don't think Ja Morant, this is not a giving up on this era move. This is we have our guys. We need to get more out of the guys that are on the roster move to me.
What do you think about Jeff Van Gundy?
That is a name that has been batted about from folks that, have a little bit ahead of me. I want to stress my move against Taylor Jenkins. I'm a pretty aggressive Jenkins apologist. It's only in the last 3 months or so that, if this had happened 6 months ago, I would have been stunned. Jeff Van Gundy has been a name that's been batted about in that potential mix. Anybody that has had success with players before and won basketball games at a high level, getting to the Western Conference or Eastern Conference Finals, the NBA Finals, anybody with those kinds of accolades would be good to see in Memphis. And again, somebody like Van Gundy, who had a falling out, obviously was an analyst on television, working as an assistant again. I think those kinds of names make a lot of sense. But again, Memphis is the smallest market in the NBA. How are you going to bring in that type of coaching talent is a fair question to ask.
Yeah, I had to put my Ja Morant thing up there in case you were wondering.
I like it.
I thought you were going to put Cade Cunningham up there, Coach.
No, I don't have a Cade Cunningham thing. But and by the way, I wonder what Chris Finch must be thinking right now too, because I suspect he would probably be in a similar situation as well, where they're not going to fire him now. But it sounds like there's going to be a revolving door over the offseason with some coaching here in a couple different spots. So that's good for Jenkins to be able to find somewhere to go, and I certainly hope that that happens and that he continue to adjust, or maybe have that assistant coach that is the guy that can get those adjustments going. But I don't know. We have to see. Van Gundy's an interesting suggestion out there at Combo, because he's dipped his toe back in there as an assistant, so you never know if he gets that bug to just want to run the whole team, which usually you don't get. You don't lose that bug when you once you have it. The Drew Show has one more super chat for us. This is what's wrong with the NBA nerd pinheads like this guy. The Bernie Bicker NBA math is just so trite and stupid. Sports math never adds up. I don't know who he's talking about, but
it has to be me, I would imagine.
Well, we're also the nerd pinheads, and Drew is usually very nice. I don't know. I think maybe he's talking about maybe the GM or something.
Yeah,
it's at the comments, but sports math, right? There is a math that adds up, and it doesn't add up. And certainly, I always use it for the eye test. And so, if I see something that's bothering me, then I can usually go back and see, well, does that confirm it with the numbers, not the other way around. So, at any rate, I think and the interim coach. I don't know, Joe. Did you say that the assistant's going to take over? Thomas. That was the announcement I saw.
If that has been announced, I haven't seen it. It's certainly possible. I've been recording podcasts and talking to you guys, so it's possible it's been announced.
Oh, breaking news right here on the
I don't know. I saw it before, but anyway, Thomas Lasallo or Isallo is seems to be the guy who's going to take over, who's the assistant. I don't know him, but do you know who that is?
Yeah, I know who it is. They brought him in. He was with Paris basketball for a while, successful over there in Europe. It's always been kind of rumored that he would be the guy potentially to take over in this spot. But yeah, being
sure
official.
We'll see more pick and roll then. If it's
I would imagine so. But again, he was given a lot of the credit for this offense that has neutered John Morant to an extent.
So doesn't that kind of push back on your point with the offense and everything? If they're bringing in the guy that kind of initiated.
Again, I want to stress, Coach Nick, I'd love to know who your source is. I have not seen that yet. I haven't gotten anything from the team.
I saw it on a couple different ones, but I'm looking right now at the Bleach Report report of this from. Doesn't say when they publish it, but I saw it before it went live, so I think maybe it was right before that they announced it. It makes sense to me, but I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure then.
All you got to do is go on Twitter, right, and say Memphis Grizzlies, and it'll come up. No.
Anyway, either way, I mean, it's going to be one of the assistants, and it's probably that one. So either way, I don't know. I find like we've seen
coaches
be switched in midseason and the team wins a title. We've seen this with Tyronn Lue did this with the Cavs. Right? I believe, right? Am I crazy? That was the year that he took over, right?
Yeah, Sham. By the way, Shams tweeted it.
Okay.
Yeah, I see it now. Yep. Yeah. While I was recording.
So does that make you change your thoughts a little bit, since like the offense was kind of the issue, and then the person who initiated the offense is now the interim head coach?
But again, it might be interim head coach to get them through the end of the season, right? Like, just because he's the interim head coach doesn't mean he's going to be the head coach. It could be a guy that they brought in to have them kind of have a soft landing to the season, execute how he interprets the offense might be different than how Taylor Jenkins interpreted the offense, the way that he calls it, the way that he treats injuries, the progression to return to injuries. There's aspects of how you execute any sports organization, but especially an NBA one, he could completely make it look different, although it's all under the same umbrella, and how the rotations work, what guys get more opportunity. It's not just the scheme itself, it's how it's implemented and how it's executed that is worth keeping an eye on.
For sure.
Ja's only averaging 30 minutes a game, right?
Right. And again, that's another example. That's something that's been talked about. The Grizzlies play their starters less than anybody in the entire league. So could that be something that changes now that there's a new head coach, at least interim head coach?
Yeah.
I think that bears watching.
Well, that's two things. Certainly it's really easy overnight to change the lineups and the rotations like that. And I think it's also easy if you wanted to go more pick and roll heavy, that would also be very easy to do overnight and change that stuff right away. Which, again, could somebody have whispered to Taylor Jenkins, hey, play him more and run more pick and roll, which, by the way, I have to imagine before they decided to fire him, if that was some of the issues, they would have brought them up with him And then if he says, well, I'm not doing that, I don't believe in that sort of way, then that makes firing him a lot easier. And that maybe starts to explain something, because there's not a lot of explanations short of him doing something very egregious that they had to make a decision, which, as far as I could tell, knowing the guy a little bit and what we were hearing from you, Joe, it just doesn't seem like you'd be able to keep that under wraps, at least for that much longer, right? Something's going to come out if something happened, right?
Yeah, I would imagine so. And it's a situation where, again, Jenkins got the team to a certain place, and whether it is Osaro or somebody else, are they going to be able to make this team what the pay of its best players say it should be, right? And the pay of their 3 best players says that they should be one of the best teams in the league, led by a veteran group who has played a lot of meaningful basketball. Context matters. Memphis hasn't had those opportunities. I think that it's really going to come down to how this scheme is implemented under a new vision, how the rotations are operated, how they decide. I mentioned Zach Edey being taken out as a starter. Is that something that changes now? What does the starting lineup look like? Do they go back, because they've tried some different things defensively? Do they go back to what they were doing several weeks ago, as opposed to the defensive alterations? We really don't have any way of knowing, unless you want to go back and watch Paris basketball Euro Cup tape. We don't really have any chance or capacity to guess what this guy's going to do at the NBA level. All we know is what he is as an assistant. Again, he gets credit for the offense, but at the same time, that offense has limited Ja Morant. Is he going to be more effective at implementing pick and roll within this motion scheme? If he's better at that than Taylor Jenkins, then maybe he is the guy moving forward, because clearly Jenkins wasn't able to get that done.
Absolutely. Well, Joe, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show and breaking this down. This is really great. Tell the good people out there where they can find you and all your work.
Yeah, you could go to Locked On Grizzlies. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, anywhere you get a podcast. You can check us out at Locked On Grizzlies. I write a daily newsletter, Locked On Daily. You can subscribe, get words from me on the Grizzlies each and every day. I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about with coaching in the days ahead. Also writing over at Grizzlead, contributing there, Grizzlead with the lead. So Locked On Grizzlies is the main spot. Locked On Daily, me and DeMichael Cole, Memphis Grizzlies beat writer, talking about the Grizzlies each and every day for the Locked On Podcast Network.
Love it. Well, thanks so much, Joe. Again, that was an awesome breakdown and really gave us some insights, and we'll have to keep up on the story and see what happens.
Absolutely. Thank you, fellas. Appreciate y'all.
Anytime.
Yep. All right, so there you have it. The adjustments that they need to make would be really easy. I don't know if Klingon would have been the guy I would have picked over Edey, who's a guy who I didn't think was going to fit well in the NBA, and can barely get minutes on a team that's not trying to even win, right? So it's weird. If they wanted to go motion, I think the Ware is probably the most impressive of the people we mentioned as far as that goes in terms of who they wanted to pick. But interesting. And so right now, let's just look at that. Right now, Memphis is reeling, but they are clinging to the 5th spot, tied with the Lakers as we have that showdown coming up. And I know.
By the way, Klingon is getting minutes, Coach Nick.
What's that?
Klingon's getting minutes.
No, he's not. I mean, as of 2 weeks ago, he was playing like 13 or 14, wasn't he?
Played 18, 32, 19. There was one game he didn't play, 26, 25, 30, 34, what? 32.
Yeah. I've been checking throughout the season. Let's see here. Well, let's see. His average is 18.6. So that's gone up because it wasn't that high before. But let's see. All right. So I guess they've finally shifted and given him more minutes now. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it looks like in the last couple weeks, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So good for him. Is he producing in those minutes is the question. A little bit.
He had 18 versus Cleveland.
All right, I'll do a little dive. I'll look at it. I'll see. I just felt like I don't know.
I definitely think his skills seemed more. I wasn't the biggest clinging guy, but it seemed like his skills were a little more transferable than Edey's when they were.
Yeah, that's not a hot take.
Yeah.
But I just felt like movement pattern, he just seemed a little on the awkward side, and
you would figure maybe he could do better at catching a lob and protecting the rim than Edey could. And maybe slightly be able to slide his feet better than Edey could. But Edey was just a way better post player, But what does that mean in the NBA?
I would think that Edey would be better at protecting the rim than. I mean, they're both
in the NBA when you kind of have to go in and out of the lane, because of 3 seconds.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. little bit. Although, and then we had seen Edie like starting to shoot a little from the 3-point line.
He's had some flashes in the league. Like he's been okay. Yeah.
That it's.
But
really,
I don't know, man. Coach Nick, something must have happened there, right? With
Jenkins. Did something happen? It's weird because, I think if it did happen and we're going to I don't think that's going to be kept under wraps for more than a few days. Taylor Jenkins, as far as I know, listen, anybody could be anybody and could make a mistake at any time, right? It doesn't matter. I don't know. Because what would you end up doing? Like to get fired now, you got to do something pretty egregious if it is something like that, right? You gotta you hit somebody. Like now there was a fight on the bench, not involving him, but that happened, which happens, right? We
forgot to ask Joe about that. It was
God darn it, but Bain shoved down Aldama. And again, it doesn't have to be anything that happens. We've seen that in successful teams and all the time. So, I don't know. I don't know if it was anything other than that. Although you're right, the argument kind of needs to be that it did. There was something else. Now you could say they've been looking at it for weeks. They're realizing that the team's not playing well. They're not beating winning teams. Let's see how they play against OKC. And they were competing. It was great. They're like, okay, this is great. We're not going to fire him. And then it went south toward the end, the last 6-7 minutes in a hurry. No adjustments. And so I kind of want to dig into that game to see if there's anything else in there. But, there have been little on the margin stuff and decisions about coaching that you might say, all right, well, the adjustment stuff and situational stuff, it could be better in a situation where you want to have a team compete for a championship. But I don't know. I'm just it's still strange to me. Do you think that something happened?
Yeah, I think so. Because why would you do it right before the playoffs? I don't see the benefit. See what happens in the playoffs and fire him after the season.
Right. Again, and they have to know that too.
And then also, I was kind of talking to this about Joe, and we obviously appreciate his time. But if the issue is the offense, then they brought in the guy that brought that offense in. Maybe they don't think the issue is that type of offense as much, But then Joe said maybe it's more about who's getting the highest usage in those opportunities, in that offense.
Right. If it wasn't Ja Morant driving this, and by the way, that's the other thing that, if it's the star player driving it, okay, maybe, but they were just dancing around the other day together doing some coordinated thing, which that either says a lot or doesn't say anything either. So, or was there, something we don't know about that was a really big, confrontation between the players. Now, there was these whisperings you already hear. If you dig through enough, it says he lost the locker room. You know what? I should have asked you about that too. There are whispers about that. I don't know if you've seen that. And so
I saw a little bit of that, but that's just isn't that kind of generic and vague?
Right. Maybe. Maybe. It's just a lot of questions, and I don't even know if it's worth speculating too much more. So, but that's what we have, and that's about as much information as anyone's going to give you in today, I bet.
True.
So, all right. Well, good stuff, Combo.
All right.
And we'll see. Let's see. It's Friday.
We're gonna start doing some different stuff soon, right?
We'll have to. We'll keep discussing some stuff and figure it out, and figure out some different ways of covering the playoffs for you guys. And great how we had today. Great questions. So stay tuned. We're going to figure out some things where we can make it more inclusive for people to join our lives and get questions answered and all that stuff. So stay tuned for that. We'll figure it out, and then we'll be back on Monday, right, Combo?
Yes, sir.
All right. So thank you, everybody, for there. Thank you, Joe, for being on the show with us today. And don't forget, sports fans, at B-Ball Breakdown, we're not a channel. We're a conversation. You in? Are you in, Combo?
Yes, sir.